Good morning. I'm not going to talk for very long because I am mindful that we are going to listen to an excellent keynote and learn a bit more about the Education Commission hearing from Professor Joo-Ho Lee. But also we have a really exciting panel and some of the people that I admire, most, who are championing education at the front line and transforming children's lives every day. But just to give those of you who don't know very much about the Global Business Coalition a little perspective on the work that we're doing, and particularly where we are now. 4 or 5 years ago, when we looked to gather together a group, Justin Van Fleet, others and I, brought together a group of maybe 20 CEOs from businesses, most of them American global businesses, a couple of them around the world, put them around a table and said, if you look at the difference between the investment in global health compared to the investment in global education and that massive gap, surely we can be doing something. I myself came from a campaigning background, but from a global health background, and had seen the transformative change for HIV/AIDS, for malaria, for maternal mortality, for all kinds of health interventions across the world, reaching some of the most vulnerable citizens, and in times of greatest crisis, and yet education was never at the forefront. And the pushback was always that, well, if there's a big crisis, you have to go in there with food and shelter and water and sanitation and emergency healthcare, and education has to wait. And that's been the conventional wisdom until recent years for a long time. I think that shift is changing. More people are on the move around the world than ever before. There are crises everywhere. Anyone can be caught up in that. Syrian families who were going about their normal lives not so many years ago, looking after friends from Lebanon, family members from Lebanon coming across, sheltering them during their time of war, now find themselves in a time of unbelievable turmoil and aggression, and we see families fleeing there. Those families have an immediate expectation that the first priority for themselves is for their children to be able to continue their education. And yet over the 4, 5, 6 years of that conflict, children have been left out of school until recently, and missed 2, 3, 4 years of schooling, which, if you think of your own children having that gap in their education, is unimaginable. The world has turned its attention to Syria. We're seeing, that peace may still be some way off. But if you look at the surrounding countries, Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey, those countries have dug very, very deep into their own pockets and accommodated and opened the doors to welcome it. And seeing Syrian children being able to return to school through the double shift systems with the support of countries like the USA, my country, the UK, Norway and others, being able to contribute financially as well. We can see that working. And we need to be able to offer that opportunity for every child everywhere in the world, whatever may be happening to them. So whether they're caught up in conflict and crisis and emergency disaster, or it's really the scourge of poverty that is preventing them from being able to have hope for their future and to realise their potential. And it is the private sector that needs to play a part. Governments will not do it on their own. Civil society does an extraordinary job, but again, can't reach every child. So the dream of the Global Business Coalition was to bring together business leaders to look at what they could do. And I think that the role of CSR is already changing. You'll have many meetings here where you're looking at that changing way of what companies do to get involved, to partner up, whether it is directly providing exercise books or it's looking at providing the skill set of its own workforce to pass that on and create a greater global competence, as Tony Jackson places such focus on for Asia Society here. So we've been working away over the last few years. A lot of our work has been the campaigning and the messaging to galvanise the interest and excitement in the area. And we're seeing everywhere across the UN meetings this week enormous numbers of efforts and attempts to look at finding a way for every child to go to school, and then significantly for them to have a quality education, what they're learning is going to equip them with the skills that they need for the future, and also with the citizenship skills they need. The UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has always placed great emphasis on global citizenship as being as important as your ability to read and write. So here we are today, where we know we're part of a movement now that is involving many people. There are many companies wanting to do the right thing, but knowing that their contributions on their own might be small or not coordinated or just fall short of what would add up to making the greater difference. So I think our challenge, which is why we welcome being able to cooperate and work with Asia Society so closely, is to look at ways to make that involvement and that engagement more meaningful. One of the things that we have done this year, looking at response to crises, is companies very often will say, look, if there's a crisis, just call us. Call us and we can provide corrugated iron sheeting for shelters, or we can be the distribution people, or, IKEA are very good at saying we can send flat packs anywhere you like, or, Coca-Cola will open up their supply chains, or there are just different things that companies can do if asked at short notice. But the question is, who would you ask and when and to do what? So we've been working with Tom Fletcher, who's the former British ambassador to Lebanon, but who's come and joined the Global Business Coalition as the Global Strategy Director, who's developed a new database to create a hub where we can store the information of companies who want to mark out what it is they might be able to offer. But at a time of crisis, you can actually move quickly to know who to phone the right person on the right day. So that's in its early stages, but has captured a lot of attention and interest this week, and something that we hope we could take forward. Somebody said rather significantly, I heard them say yesterday, that it's in the crisis is not the moment to start handing out the business cards to work out. You want to have done all of that preparation before, and I think that was it has stayed with me. So that is where we are. But this week has also been a time where putting out a roadmap for how we actually achieve the great goal of trying to get 61 million out of children into school and more than 250 million children who are estimated who are not learning has actually not been a piece of work that we've modestly been able to take with our Small Business Coalition, but the work of the Education Commission. And there's been the Norwegian government, supported with a number of other countries coming on board to chair it, the International Commission on Financing Global Education Opportunity. I do know the person who's chairing it. It's my husband, Gordon Brown, so I can give him a plug. But he's also put together a group of remarkable commissioners, former country leaders, people with expertise in education themselves, and a few days ago they published their report, and one of the commissioners who's played a really important part in it is Professor Joo-Ho Lee, who's the former Minister of Education, Science and Technology in his home country in the Republic of Korea, but has been an extraordinary and active commissioner there and bringing all of his skills. So I'm going to cede the podium to him, Professor Joo-Ho Lee.
Thank you, Sarah Brown, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished guests. It is my great honor to give a keynote speech for this very meaningful event. At the launch event of the Education Commission's report to UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon on last Sunday, the Commission concluded that it is possible to get all young people into school and learning within one generation. The Commission is challenging development partners to rally behind this bold vision of creating a learning generation. To achieve the learning generation, the Commission calls for a financing compact between developing countries and the international community, realized through 4 education transformations in performance, innovation, inclusion, and finance. Under this compact, the national government would commit to 4 education transformation. The international community would offer the increased financing support through the establishment of a new global education investment mechanism. As a commissioner of the International Education Commission and a former Korean Minister of Education, Science and Technology, and at the same time as a Korean who belongs to the first learning generation of Korea, I would like to elaborate more on 4 education transformations from the perspective based on Korean experience. First, inclusion. The Commission advocates progressive universalism, recognizing the scarcity of public funding, and proposes that funds be allocated for the highest return activities and to those least able to pay for services. Korea provides an outstanding example of how progressive universalism can lead. Korea successfully universalized elementary education within a decade after the establishment of the government in 1948, despite the Korean War from 1950 to 1953. In the 1950s, the government enforced compulsory education and allocated about 80% of total education budget for compulsory education on top of foreign aids. The enrollment rate passed 90% in 1957 and reached 96.4% in 1959. The newly universalized elementary schooling laid foundation for the growth of secondary education after 1960s. Progressive universalism has enabled Korea to provide the quality education for all. If a child could show high academic performance in basic education, which already had been universalized in late 1970s, regardless of economic and social status, one could get admitted from very high quality vocational and technical high schools with tuition exemption, or even from those world-class universities with the scholarships supported by public and private foundations. Along with the realization of progressive universalism, Korean people became to believe that schooling is the most important way to set their next generation from the ignorance and poverty. And at the same time, Korean government has kept putting highest priorities on education in order to combat poverty. Therefore, I am strongly in favor of progressive universalism as important means of expanding provision of quality education for everyone, while prioritizing the needs of the poor and the disadvantaged, as suggested by the Education Commission report. Second, innovation. The Commission emphasizes that improving the performance of current system is not enough. Far-reaching innovation is needed to equip young people with the new knowledge and skills they need for the fourth industrial revolution era. When I was a Minister of Education, Science and Technology between 2010 and 2013, US President Barack Obama praised Korean education several times. And I was a little embarrassed because I was in the middle of pushing ahead with education reform, asking teachers and administrators to make drastic changes. One area that I really focused on was vocational and technical high schools that had continuously deteriorated after its glory days in 1970s. We turned around these failing vocational and technical high schools through MICE high school initiatives. When I first saw the eyes of those students of failing schools without any hope, I was really shocked. But after the reform, I saw their eyes with full of energies and enthusiasms. Opening up strategy was pivotal in turning around these failing schools into MICE high schools. High-level industry experts, including former CEOs, were invited to lead the new MICE high school as principals. For example, Busan Automotive High School invited the former vice president of Renault Samsung as a principal. MICE high schools were opened up to have very strong partnership with industries. They overhauled the whole curriculum to offer new high-tech majors such as LED lighting, new media contents, robotics, and software. And industries invited teachers to receive long-term in-house training within the company and expanded recruitment contracts for students. They also donated expensive machinery and facilities for the practice of students. For instance, Hyundai Hynix donated very expensive semiconductor machineries for Chungbuk Semiconductor MICE high schools. The MICE high schools triggered a cascade of positive changes across the whole education system. Universities are offering job-first degree-related programs to students. Other vocational high schools have shifted their focus to preparing students to find employment rather than blindly advancing to universities. Career counseling in secondary school is also being strengthened. Another area of innovation that I put high priorities was changing pedagogies of teachers to nurture 21st centuries for students, such as creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, and communication skills. It's widely known that Korean students are always on the top of OECD PISA test in reading, math, and science. But high scores in PISA would probably mask the low performance of Korean students in 21st century skills. Korean teachers are heavily dependent upon the rote learning and assessment, rote learning and memorization when they teach, and multiple choices when they assess students. I played a key role in introducing an admission officer system in universities by providing government subsidies for universities to compensate admission officers. We expected that if universities accept students not based on just test scores, but based on interviews, essays, and student records in schools that could be evaluated by admission officers, the practice of teaching based on rote learning and the practice of assessment based on multiple choices could be changed. However, teachers appear to not as active as private tutors to adapt to the new admission officer system. So when I came back to the academia and have been doing research and talking to many teachers in the classroom, I realized that just top-down approach is not enough to make positive changes in the classroom. So with my research fellows in KDI, we approach we are trying to make a bottom-up approach. We first approached just 2 schools and provide them with the teacher training and counseling on new pedagogies of project-based learning. We also did a very interesting experiment based on behavioral economics, asking students how much they donate for the public goods. In that experiment, we found that students taught by teachers who were trained on project-based learning donate much more for public goods. We interpret this as an evidence that when teachers change their pedagogies toward a PBL, students' collaboration skills or social capital could increase. Now we are extending this bottom-up change to include 6 more schools, and I hope that as 49 mile-style schools could trigger positive change in the whole Korean education system, the project-based learning schools that we are supporting could trigger the positive changes in pedagogies of all Korean teachers. Next, performance. The Commission stresses strengthening the performance of education system by designing in a focus on results at every level. I was a member of National Assembly before joining the Lee Myung-bak administration. As a lawmaker, I helped pass the Education Information Disclosure Law because I thought without knowing the performance of each school, we cannot fix the problem of failing students. The law made it mandatory to do standardized tests for every 6th, 9th, and 11th graders every year. With strong concerns of the teacher union, the government decided to utilize the information achieved by the national standardized test only for carrots, not for sticks. Government offer more funding for those schools with high proportion of below minimum standard students so that they could offer tutoring services for the catering for the needs of those students lagging behind by hiring more assistant teachers and by purchasing more teaching materials. I found one article in academic journal that empirically showed that Korean system of accountability based on national standardized test is superior to American No Child Left Behind because Korea uses the information as only for carrots, not as sticks. Finally, finance. The Commission recommends increase and improve financing for education. As a way of increasing financing for education, in 1971, Korea adopted Education Grant Act that linked the certain percentage of national tax revenue to education budget. So education budget is very stably secured by this education grant law. And the percentage has been increased from 13% in 1971 to 20% in 2010. The government education expenditure budget became equivalent to 4.5% of GDP now. However, tuition payment by household adds 2% more of GDP, and private tutoring fees adds another 2% of GDP. Therefore, Korea is spending as much as 99% of GDP on education. And it should be noted that private tutoring industry has mushroomed to reach 2% of GDP level in Korea. This is really worrisome. It is quite interesting that a commission report pointed out that low and middle income countries spend 2% of GDP that do not lead to learning, partly due to the fact that too much of teachers' time is spent not in classroom in those countries. To a great extent, spending in private tutoring in Korea does not lead to learning either. Many students do advanced study in cram schools with private tutors during the vacation time or even during weekend, nighttime, before formal class in school, and they do not pay attention to what teachers teach in classroom because they already learn from private tutors. So I'd like to say that Korea also has its own challenges, education challenges, and I recommend Korean government that to start more drastic second round education reform for our third learning generation in Korea. Summing up, the importance to create a learning generation is shared by all countries. All countries will gain from action, and all will face the dangerous consequence of inaction. And the action of each country should be strongly supported by concerted actions of international community. I'd like to conclude by quoting Gordon Brown in his preface of the Education Commission report. He said, "It is education, our ability to plan and prepare for the future, that gives us hope." Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Lee. That was a brilliant summary of the Commission's findings, and also a very nice way to see how Korea has begun to execute on many of those findings, but also your candor in talking about the challenges in Korea as well. So we appreciate that very much. I'm going to ask the panel to come up now, and as we do, I'll just make a few remarks as I head over to the end of the table. So if my mic is on, as Josette said, I am Tony Jackson. I'm the Vice President for Education here at Asia Society, and also, as of about an hour from now, head of the Center for Global Education when it gets officially launched. It's my great pleasure to have you all here, and just to say that the topic we're discussing today is extremely urgent. It's reflected throughout the Commission's report, but I think one sort of phrase that really kind of connects to me as to how important all this is, and I quote, "If the world does not equip all young people with the skills they need to participate in the future economy, the cost of inaction and delay could be irreparable. And there is and must be a better way." And of course, the Commission does lay out a better way. And one of the things I thought was particularly interesting is that they called for every young person to not just, as Sarah pointed out, not just receive an education, but a high-quality education, a kind of education that actually develops the skills, what we would call the global competencies that will allow them to actually be employable in the 21st century. So we're going to have a chance to continue that discussion in a bit more depth with our panel. For the sake of time, I'm going to be very brief in my introductions of these fine folks. To my immediate left is Phil Regier, as we heard earlier, University Dean for Education Initiatives and CEO at EdPlus at Arizona State University. Next to him is Wendy Kopp, who probably is known by everybody in the room, but as we all heard, is the director of the Education for All, having previously for 20 years done Teach for America, got America Straight, goes now working in the world altogether. Next is Amrita Patwardhan, who is the head of education of the Tata Trusts. And on the end is my good friend Madhav Chavan, who I think you all know is the co-founder of Pratham, one of the world's most effective NGOs serving children. So let me just dive right into the questions. And to start with, the Commission recommends investments, as Minister Lee said, investments in education as a global public good. It's what governments should do to support their young people. But at the same time, we've seen really strong leadership and innovation coming from the private sector. And, for example, the use of technology to personalize education, to make it a unique experience for every young person. So the question is, how can we support both public systems and private innovation in education? Is there a balance that can be struck, and what does that look like? Phil, maybe I can start with you.
Okay. So most of my comments are going to be directed to higher education because that's what I know best. And just to kind of set the stage, right now there are about 165 million people in the world trying to access or accessing higher education, post-secondary education in the world. Over the next 15 years, that amount is going to grow by 150%. So close to 400 million will be attempting to access higher education by 2030. That, to meet the demand with brick and mortar universities would require the construction of 4 new universities, 4 major universities every week for the next 15 years. And that's simply not going to happen. And so we must proceed with some type of technological innovation and public-private partnership. I'm just going to give one example because Tony mentioned adaptive learning technologies. Adaptive learning technologies are fantastic. They can distinguish what I know from what he knows, from what you know, and they can feed content to individuals automatically. I saw an unbelievable demonstration of the Amazon's Alexa device doing intelligent tutoring. But right now, you can go to edX and you can access a course that we happen to be teaching called, it's a college algebra course, right? Anybody in the world can take that course for free, and it is driven and it is built on a platform built by McGraw-Hill Education called ALEX. ALEX is an adaptive learning system. Anybody in the world can take that course for free and learn college algebra. And McGraw-Hill Education, now if you took that course at ASU and you used ALEX, you'd pay $110 to access that on average. McGraw-Hill is allowing that technology to be used for free because they know it's available and because if they don't do it, somebody else will. And so they believe that there will be a way to monetize that going forward. But right now it's available for free and anybody can use that to learn college algebra. I know you probably don't have anything to do this evening, but go ahead and try it. And by the way, if you complete the course and you actually want credit, we'll provide you credit from Arizona State University for that course at a greatly reduced cost. Right now that cost is above what it would be at a global level. It's too high at a global level, but there's no reason I can't drive that down from $600 to $6 a course, for example.
Wendy.
Well, I'll just say I am really excited to see the Commission report in general, which I think did such a powerful and really beautiful job of clarifying what needs to happen if we're going to get on a path to meet this SDG, and particularly around the recommendation for greater investments in what they called global public goods, which I think can really actually increase and spread innovation from both the public and the private sectors. The idea here is that, I mean, we all know that the only path to meaningful, sustainable change in communities is through, local leadership and ownership. And I think as a result, you look at where all of the kind of public funding goes, even at a global level, it goes straight to local communities. And yet, the level of innovation that we are going to need, and this report makes it powerfully clear. I mean, if we're on this trajectory, we need to sort of get on this trajectory. It's going to require enormous amounts of innovation. And given that reality, sending all of that funding straight to local communities is probably not the wisest thing to do. We should send most of it straight to communities, but fueling the creation of, as they say, global public goods, a global ecosystem of organizations from the public sector, from the private sector, that are all about working at the global level, spreading proven practices, building local capacity, and fostering the spread of innovation and new ideas from community to community and country to country, I think will be really crucial to get where we're trying to go. So we're really excited about that recommendation in particular, and I think it can really take us forward.
Great. Amrita, can you comment?
I think the way in India we have a very strong civil society, non-government sector, which has several successful examples of working in the public education system, trying to strengthen that. I think the issue is that really of scale, because many of these examples continue to remain as islands of excellence, so to say, that there is a sort of excellent partnership of the public system providing the service and the gap areas being addressed by the non-profit civil society players, whether it is innovation in curriculum, whether it is training teachers in pedagogic capacities, or sort of bringing in technology. I think the pathways for taking some of these learnings and then scaling it up where we seem to be really struggling, and I think that's probably an area where we need to really pay far more attention as to how these innovative practices do not remain isolated in pockets. That I feel is...
Yes, I mean, that's exactly what we've been thinking a lot about here at Asia Society in terms of taking our own work to a greater scale, the use of online learning as a way to really push that out. But Madhav, I wonder if you could comment on this as well.
Somehow the language of the Commission report is very strong, that you're headed for a big disaster if you don't do it right. And somehow we tend to think that the system is going to be exactly the same, and we're going to bring about all the changes. I think there's a fundamental error there. So for example, if you're talking about private investment, private innovations, and public systems, we just heard the problem in Korea, and we have the same problem in India. I'm sure it's all over the place. Kids go to school and kids go to private tutors. Right? That's the system. And then kids don't pay attention to the teacher. Universal problem. So I'll ask a question. Since I'm a not-for-profit troublemaker, I can ask this question. I'll say, why do kids have to go to both? Why don't you give the parents the option of either you send them to school or to the tutors? It's a saving of time, saving of resources. Why would you not do that? Is it possible to do that? There's a problem there. Because the schools are a very important daycare center. They serve a purpose. So I think we need to look at the system and say, how is this system going to change? How to change the system itself? It's not about just making curricular changes and teacher training to do the new courses. I don't think that will work, because things are moving ahead outside the school system extremely rapidly, and we are not up to the challenge. Children are learning much more outside the school things that are not in your curriculum, and they may benefit more from what they learn outside the school in the job market than what you can ever provide. So is the system strangling education? Is it allowing learning? What do you need to change? I think some of these questions will have to be, but then the private investment can come in. A second troubling thought I have is with the system as it is today, all of us, the 3 of us here and 30 others, would all pounce on the school system and say, I have a solution. Why don't you buy mine? And the system doesn't know what to do. Unless you have fixed a goal of what you want to do and what you want to achieve, there are not-for-profits and for-profits pouncing. And it's like what happens in the contracting system. Is that the way to go about? I don't envy the government officer who has to make a decision as to who to go with. So how are you going to do this? So while you can encourage private innovations to go into the school, how exactly would you do it? The example in India that I would like to give before stopping is Nandan Nilekani, who was the former CEO of Infosys, went into government, and he had already done some work on major platforms, and he created a biometrics-based unique ID system for all of India. Now, 1 billion people have registered already on it, out of 1.3 billion. It's a huge innovation that government undertook with a private player actually sitting there and saying, let us do it this way. This is possible. So the government should start now looking at, unless you loosen the system is now fixed, who's going to get promoted to where and so on. How will you change that? I think those are very key things to be considered, and you can't do a patchwork within the same system. That's my opinion. I don't think Sarah is very happy with that. I don't know.
No, I wasn't unhappy. I think one of the things you're all addressing across the panel is how to improve quality learning for children in school or in insufficient school. And I think there's a greater challenge, which is those children who don't get a single day at school at all, where you're needing to create education systems from scratch. And I think the Education Commission report, I'm not the commissioner, President Kikwete is commissioner and Professor Lee is a commissioner. I wasn't part of the commission, so I don't need to speak for it or, but the question is about out-of-school children, not just raising the quality for children who are in school too.
For all children, whether in school or out of school. We are too system-focused. How about becoming children-focused? So just a shift in thinking. Doesn't matter whether this child is in school or not in school. How would you focus on the child and deliver the learning outcomes?
My colleague Tony McKay and I were recently at a meeting at Harvard where, looking at the future of education, the distinction was made between schooling and learning and whether or not they're unnecessarily the same path. So it's an interesting question to raise. Let me move forward with another aspect of the Commission's report. The Commission noted that, as I think Josette said, that businesses report that they can't fill 40% of the workforce because of the lack of skilled applicants. And they said that essentially there needs to be a real strong push towards collaboration between business and education. And I want to ask the panel, but I actually want to start with a colleague from the audience. What are some of the ways in which the type of collaboration between business and education can play out, and how can that be used towards developing 21st century skills and global competence? I'm actually going to ask our colleague, the former head of state of Tanzania, to address this to begin with, and then we'll come back to the panel.
You caught him by surprise.
To address.
Sorry, I perhaps thought you were going to be prepped for this, but I'll tell you what the question was after all. We just wanted to know if you had a thought about how business and education can work together from the point of view of a head of state. Has there been experience or have you had experience where that kind of collaboration has taken place, or you wished it to take place? What are your thoughts about kind of how that might play out?
Business and government. Yeah, how can business and government work together in education? One, of course, we have, our experience has been, we have private schools. private schools, primary, secondary. Now we even have private universities. That's a major contribution, because at a time when the government cannot cater for all needs to need the children, the private sector can also complement efforts of government. Of course, the only problem you have is they become too expensive in terms of affordability. Yeah, and when you have the majority of the people poor, so they tend to be, the private schools tend to cater for the elite more than the general public. But of course, those who can afford it will take their children to private schools. So our challenge in government has always been how to scale up investment in education, both to enable to create more access to students and also to increase quality of teaching. So the issue has been teachers, getting enough teachers, which has been a shortage, getting the textbooks, getting the teaching materials. So these are some of the issues. Of course, it's again, as Professor Joe has said, it's more of a government giving education a higher slot in the government. For me, during my time, more than 10 years, education has always been the number one budget line, getting more money than any other sector, getting 20% of the budget on the average. Of course, in our case, really, it has been an issue where first we had to deal with universal primary education to make sure that every boy or girl of school age gets to primary school. We went up to 98% by the time I left, and then we came up with a kind of a crunch where you have many boys and girls completing primary school, but they cannot get a place in secondary school. That's why now we had to get to massive program of working with communities, saying that build schools, the government will provide with the roofing and so on. Well, it was amazing, because there was so much thirst for schools that in the 10 years we built over 3,000 secondary schools through this, and therefore we were able now to take all boys and girls who pass their primary school examination into secondary school, so that I was able to declare now we want every boy or girl who education should be universal from primary to secondary. It was just based on that. So I'm saying there is that combination between the private sector and the private sector in education. That's one area. Of course, the private sector are the ones who are producing the books, the teaching materials, and so on. So there is that combination.
Thanks very much. That's right.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I really feel very compelled to intervene. I'm normally very disciplined, but I'm one of the education commissioners on the Education Commission, and we've worked really a whole year on this. And I want to challenge one thing. We didn't work on schooling. We worked on learning. And I think it's important to say that there are two axes in the commission report. So one is we looked at what works for learning, and what we found out is that if every country moves as fast as the 25% best improver in their income level, which is really important. So we didn't say, Ghana has to move as fast as Norway or as Finland, because it will be not realistic. But we looked at different income level, and we said if every country moves as fast as the best 25% in their income level, then we will have each child not in school, but learning. And I think what really makes learning happen is best known today in research than ever before is just so little of it finds its way to education policy. However, I agree with you, this is the evolutionary approach, and I think being pragmatic, it's really helpful, because we want to get those children to learning, because otherwise if we don't do that, by 2030, half of the children will be left out. Now, I agree with you, there is a revolutionary approach to it to say, even those 25% who are now learning, maybe if we use technology and if we use new innovations and other things, we could even pull those even more and get everyone there. And if we will not reach it by building more schools and hiring teacher only, we need to use technology to maybe bring schools to children, for example, refugees, if we can bring children to schools, etc. But I wouldn't say that the report is about schooling. It is definitely about learning with these two evolutionary approach to say the 25% best are reaching learning. We should get everyone there, and then we should get the whole world somewhere else with revolution.
Thank you for that. I'm going to move on to one other quick topic for this panel, and then we're going to open it up for a minute to the audience as well. But I actually want to raise this one issue that I think is really important, and the Commission is strong on this. It recommends investment for inclusion and making sure that there's investment that covers and makes sure that the most marginalized populations are educated well. Could you comment on what are the key factors in making that happen? And let me start with Wendy. Let's have your perspective on this.
Well, one of the most key factors, as again, the Commission report makes so clear, is just the level of innovation that we're going to need to see in strengthening the, quote, education workforce, particularly as it relates to reaching the most marginalized kids. And, we need to focus on teachers, clearly, who are the heart and soul of everything, but as well think differently about the teaching profession and its structure and different roles that different folks can play. The best way to strengthen teaching is to strengthen school leadership. We need to think about leadership at every level. And as challenging as our systems are in building a quality workforce, the challenges are even more significant when we're talking about reaching, really the most vulnerable kids. So I think centering all of our work, and I think the notion of progressive universalism is such a powerful one. Centering all of our work in thinking about how do we first reach the most marginalized kids. Whatever it takes to meet their needs will help raise the quality of the system for all of our kids.
Amrita?
One of the things I feel is really critical is targeting, in the sense that if we look at even the preschool to high school kind of education system, we have often really, really underestimated the kind of skill set and professional kind of investment that is needed, say, in the preschool teachers' preparation. So it's most unregulated, ranging from 1 month to 6 months to 1 year kind of a teacher preparation course that we have in India for a preschool teacher. Targeting the most marginalized and the foundational years need, in a way, the best and the most well-prepared teachers. So that kind of a focused, targeted preparation for teachers who are going to teach in some of the most marginalized communities. Often you have a reverse situation. It's a punishment kind of a posting. As soon as a teacher is posted in a tribal hamlet, he or she is trying to get herself transferred out because other ecosystem of support is not there. We need to somewhere reverse the situation, make sure that whether it's preschool or grade 1 or grade 2 teacher is probably the best and the most equipped in our system. I think that is one of the central ways in which I think we will be able to ensure inclusion in the true sense. Maybe.
Let me then turn to Madhav, and then you'll get the last word on this.
I'd like to give a different viewpoint.
Why am I not surprised?
So, so inclusion, creating ways of getting everybody into the system and access to the system is one way of doing it. The other one is to actually remove the barriers. For example, in many cases, if a child has not gone to school or has gone only to 4th grade, then later on there's disruption and you can't enter the university. Why not? If I can be given tools to learn by myself, why are you shutting me out of a university? So university will say you should have 16 years of schooling before you can join the university. Who says so? Now there are MOOCs. I can learn if I have tools. I'm just making a theoretical case, and actually it's not that theoretical. So getting rid of the barriers, the system creates too many barriers. You must learn all these subjects and then you will graduate high school. Says who? I mean, there is different. I mean, we have created so many barriers. The whole education system is a systematic filtration of who can go ahead. And it's all about academics. It's not about learning. It's about who can go to university, who can graduate. I think it's pointless. If I want to learn something completely different and then be treated as a graduate, why not? If I'm a very highly skilled carpenter, why do you want me to learn everything about biology? Okay. And so on. So right. I think it's about looking at barriers and obstacles and saying that, okay, we don't need these. Be practical about this. Do not be pro-system, be pro-child.
Phil.
Okay, so I'm going to pick up from those comments very quickly.
I didn't realize.
I couldn't agree with those comments more. In fact, again, part of the problem with higher education in the U.S. is that we've built a system that's based on excluding people, and the way you evaluate quality is by excluding kids. What we try and do at Arizona State is very different. We have a policy built around inclusion and how those students actually succeed when they get out. So we actually have a program right now where students can take 4 courses as MOOCs, and if they achieve a certain quality level, they're accepted into the university. Now, it doesn't work if you're between the ages of 18 to 22 because of these weird rules that the Board of Regents has established. But if you're under 18 or over 23, it works. You'll be admitted to the university. And so I do think that as we move forward, the ability to use technology, especially to include more and more people, is a real possibility. I have lots of other thoughts, but I'll stop there.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Can I get a round of applause for our panel then? Very stimulating discussion. I'm going to turn now the podium back over to Sarah, who I think you're going to have a minute or two to bring questions from the audience. So, yeah. Thank you very much.
Dismissed?
You're dismissed.
Okay, thank you.
Now you can ask questions from the audience.
Yes, right.
Hi, I'm sure people do have questions. I'm glad we've heard from President Kikwete and from Amel Kabul as the Education Commissioners here in the room. I think one of the things we were getting into was unpacking and looking at a report that perhaps not everyone's had a chance to have a look at. This was only published on Sunday as a piece of work and is entitled The Learning Generation. But we'll make sure, there are copies here. There are copies outside. There you go. The Asian Society have got it all sorted for you. So, of course, pick that up and can follow up with that. And I'm pretty sure the contacts are on there for anyone that wants to follow up with that. But does anyone have any other questions and discussions or points they want to raise?
My name is Leslie. I'm founding CEO of Think Equal. I want to commend and thank Amrita particularly for making the point about foundations. Because I think what we very easily forget is that numeracy and literacy is all we're teaching our children. And we have a missing subject on the compulsory curricula of world schools, and that is social and emotional learning. And without that, without actually educating children's hearts as opposed to their heads, and in terms of just dealing with the fallout of discriminatory mindset, cycles of violence, because we're not preparing our children with that very foundation, Amrita ji, that you mentioned, we are failing even with those who are included. And so it is, of course, about inclusion and access to education, but I would say to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, to tick the box of the World Programme of Human Rights Education, which every member state of the UN has signed up to, etc., we need right now to bring onto the compulsory curricula of world schools this missing subject from 3-year-olds. And I'm thrilled to say, and I'm here, please approach me, anyone who can help and join hands in this. We have designed the first 160 lesson plans, level 1 curriculum for 3-year-olds with the help of Sir Ken Robinson, Mary Gordon, Vicky Colbert, the top brains in social and emotional learning in the world. And we beg all of you here, please, to join hands with us and help us scale this up. It's utterly crucial for sustainable human development. Thank you for listening to that.
Thanks, Leslie. Is anyone else wanting to contribute into this discussion? I appreciate it was getting quite lively before, so maybe it's a dangerous topic. There's a...
Thank you. Thank you very much. I work for NYU Shanghai, but I am speaking as a former partner for Heidrick and Struggle in Beijing, but also as a new fellow for the National Association of Corporate Directors. We have been discussing about what business can do for education. And I think there is a very key part, which is how we look at corporate America or corporate worldwide. And how can we see from the very core leadership, from the boardroom of this corporation, how the board of directors view education, view environment, and many other social issues that relate to education. And the fact is, most of the corporate directors in the United States, whether it's blue chip company or small cap company, they are composed of CEOs, CFOs, CIOs, who have spent their whole life in the corporate world. Their knowledge about education, about environment, and many other aspects, they are second-hand knowledge, not direct knowledge. So what I would like to ask each of you to think about the solution is that especially those of you who come from the corporate world is to think about how the boardroom in the future can reflect a diversity of viewpoints that relate to education of their workforce, but also those who prepare for the workforce in the early stage. Can we put more leaders from the education sector, from the environmental protection area, into the corporate boardroom so they can provide that different viewpoints about education, first-hand viewpoints? And I think that is a challenge for us. We have seen a lot of non-profit organizations who have corporate directors coming from the corporate world. The other side is not true. How many corporate boards are actually coming from the non-profit sector with non-profit first-hand experience? It's not balanced at all. So when we talk about a diversity of corporate boards, it should not be just about women, to put more women into the boardroom, to put more ethnic minority into the boardroom, but also put more experts in the non-profit sector, experts in education into the corporate boardroom.
Thank you very much. There's a good point about the internal changes that business can make. There was somebody over on this table. Your hand go down again. And the gentleman over here.
So if I can just respond to that. I have no idea about half of what you guys do and how you do it. I make widgets. I'm a widget maker. I'm a CEO of a widget making company. And as I look at it in the boardrooms that I sit in, and our responsibility as board members is to our shareholders and to the value of our shareholders' investment in our companies. As individuals, we then have an opportunity to do whatever we like. And until we change that model and until companies are valued differently, you're not going to get what you want. How you do that is if you bring a pragmatic approach to the boardroom. And as a parent, as a father of three, when we look at the companies that we sit on, I sit on publicly traded company boards or private company traded boards. That's where you have an opportunity as a human being to impact. I think bringing non-profit people to the table is difficult. But bringing corporate people to the non-profits, which is something that it opens your eyes up as a board member and as a capitalist entrepreneur. And as such, we bring more the non-profit boards that I was able to sit on allowed me to then think about, hey, when I set my next company up, its primary focus would be education, or its primary focus would be feeding, or whatever it might be. And that's what the non-profit boards have allowed us corporate folks to be able to do. And I really doubt that you're going to see it the other way around until the shift in terms of value changes.
Well, I'm very happy to see that last week in Washington, D.C., there is this national conference for corporate directors. And there was a wonderful speaker who talked about conscientious capitalism. And the trend is that how can we educate corporate directors about the need, not only for social responsibility, but actually about the individual qualification about these corporate directors.
Great,
So
thank you.
I
I'm going to
think,
stop you just because I know it's a great conversation to start, but I want to be able to bring in other people. I think as businesses realise they need to look to where their skilled workforce in the future is going to come from, this is something that is becoming increasingly a conversation in the boardroom. Sir.
Tony McKay, friend of Asia Society. And I just want to pick up on Tony Jackson's point about a conversation we had just last week at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. You only need to get a couple of Harvard professors in the one room at the one time to get major disagreement. And we had the advocate for a trajectory of a schooling system and one for a learning system. Madhav, I think the comments that we've heard this morning remind me of a way of thinking about how we can bring this together, and perhaps a quick response if there's time, Sarah. I think most of us in this room know that we need an ecosystem. The language around system strikes me as being the problem that you've expressed, namely the constraints and barriers of the way in which we've conceived of an education system centred on schools. In all the conversations we're having globally at the moment, people are saying, can we create a healthy ecosystem where all of the players, that is educators and business and not-for-profits, young people themselves, social entrepreneurs, come together to work on ways in which we can promote learning. Now, it strikes me the OECD, over a decade ago, created scenarios for the future, and one was school as core social centre, wrapping around services of the learner in a way that's really powerful. If you take out school and say a learning environment as core social centre, and you create an ecosystem that allows everybody to contribute, surely we have got the kind of learning system and environment that we want where everybody can contribute. The difficulty, I think, is this. So-called, in biological senses, an ecosystem is self-managing and self-organising. We are not going to allow that to happen in our societies. Governments have to be enablers and brokers of a healthy ecosystem. The question is, where will the catalysts be? And I'd love to feel that those catalysts are increasingly the people in this room. That is business, social entrepreneurs, corporates, whole range of players who can come together, but there's got to be mediation so that what we want at the end of this learning is also happy, healthy people and a cohesive society. So it strikes me that I'd love to feel that a language around transforming our education system is around a language around creating a healthy ecosystem for learning, with a role for government absolutely front and centre.
Thank you so much. I think that's probably all we've got time, and I would want to hand across to Josette to be able to wrap up this event. Thank you so much for having the Global Business Coalition be part of it. We've always referred to the need to be able to drive education into the heart of where the private sector is as a smart investment. And Tony Jackson, of course, is looking with the Asia Society through the Education Centre here at creating a global competence. And I think for businesses to be served in the future, they're very much going to need to raise that. But I think, I will hand the last word to Pratham, really, which is when you say it is about being pro-child rather than pro-system, that's really where we're starting. And whether it's the earliest investment into the youngest citizens and how they mature and develop as people through their schooling and with the opportunity to go on to higher education, all of us must be pro-child. Thank you very much. Josette.
Well, thank you, everyone. You're welcome to mingle. We have a public program, public launch of the Center for Global Education at 10 o'clock right here. And I think we're going to ask the members of the Center for Global Education Advisory Board to come up for a photo right now so we don't lose you in the mix here. But thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah Brown. And thank you for everyone in the room and the panel. And a wonderful keynote address. Korea has shown how you can go from being war-torn to ending hunger, ending ignorance, and creating a new future. And it was very inspiring to hear your story. Thank you so much. Thank you. 10 o'clock.